The grand clock in the marble hallway of Ravenswood Palace struck midnight as Prince Alexander paced nervously in his private study. The weight of the crown that would soon rest upon his head felt heavier with each passing day since his father, King Edmund, had fallen gravely ill. But, tonight, something far more pressing occupied his thoughts than royal duties and state affairs. Lady Victoria Harrington, his stepmother, had crossed a line that could no longer be ignored. The woman who had married his father 3 years ago, claiming to love the aging monarch, had been systematically poisoning the court against Alexander and his younger sister, Princess Isabella. What started as subtle manipulations had escalated into something far more dangerous. Alexander had discovered the truth just hours earlier when his most trusted advisor, Lord Marcus Blackwood, presented him with irrefutable evidence. Victoria had been secretly meeting with foreign ambassadors, selling state secrets in exchange for promises of protection should anything happen to the king. More damning still, she had been slowly administering a rare toxin to King Edmund, one that mimicked the symptoms of his supposed illness while gradually weakening his mental faculties. The prince's hands trembled as he held the damning documents. Bank statements showing large deposits from enemy nations, correspondence detailing military positions, and, most shocking of all, a letter in Victoria's own handwriting discussing accelerating the timeline for the king's demise. Alexander realized that his father wasn't dying of natural causes. He was being murdered by the woman he trusted most. As the future king, Alexander faced an impossible choice. Exposing Victoria publicly would create a scandal that could destabilize the entire kingdom. Foreign enemies would see the royal family as weak and divided. The people's faith in the monarchy would be shattered. Yet allowing her to continue meant watching his father die slowly while state secrets continued flowing to their enemies. The prince walked to his window overlooking the palace gardens where he and Isabella had played as children. Those innocent days seemed like a distant memory now. The responsibility of protecting both his family and his future kingdom weighed heavily on his shoulders. He thought of his late mother, Queen Evangeline, and what she would have done in this situation. She had always taught him that sometimes leaders must make difficult decisions for the greater good, even when those decisions came with personal costs. A soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Your Highness," came the voice of Captain Thomas Sterling, head of the Royal Guard and one of Alexander's closest childhood friends. "You requested to see me urgently." Alexander turned from the window, his jaw set with determination. He had made his decision. "Thomas, I need you to gather a small team of our most trusted guards. Men who have served this family loyally for years. Men whose discretion is absolute." Captain Sterling stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. His weathered face showed concern as he noticed the prince's troubled expression. "Of course, Your Highness. What are your orders?" "Lady Victoria Harrington is to be removed from the palace immediately. Tonight. She is not to be allowed to pack personal belongings or say goodbye to anyone. She is to be escorted to the border and forbidden from ever returning to our kingdom under penalty of death." The captain's eyes widened slightly. While he had never liked the king's new wife, such drastic action was unprecedented. "Your Highness, may I ask what has prompted this decision?" "The king will surely." "The king has been poisoned," Alexander interrupted, his voice steady despite the gravity of his words. "Lady Victoria has been slowly killing him while selling our military secrets to foreign powers. I have proof of her treachery, but exposing it publicly would create chaos that our enemies could exploit. A quiet removal protects both the crown and the kingdom." Thomas Sterling had served the royal family since he was a young man, working his way up from a simple palace guard to his current position through unwavering loyalty and sharp instincts. He had survived palace intrigues before and understood the delicate balance between justice and political necessity. The prince's explanation aligned with his own suspicions about the king's declining health and Victoria's suspicious behavior. "I understand, Your Highness. When do you want this carried out?" "Within the hour." Victoria retires to her chambers at midnight every evening. You and your men will wait until she enters her room. Then, give her exactly 10 minutes to change into traveling clothes. She is to be told that her treachery has been discovered and that exile is the merciful alternative to a public trial and execution. Alexander walked to his desk and pulled out a sealed envelope. "Give her this letter. It contains enough evidence of her crimes to ensure her cooperation. Make it clear that any attempt to resist or contact my father will result in the full exposure of her betrayal, followed by immediate imprisonment and eventual execution for treason." The captain took the envelope and tucked it securely into his jacket. What about her personal servants? Her lady's maid has been with her since she arrived at court. They are to be questioned thoroughly but treated with consideration unless evidence suggests their involvement in her schemes. Most likely, they are innocent victims of her manipulation. However, her chambers are to be searched completely. Any documents, letters, or personal effects that might contain sensitive information are to be brought directly to me. As Thomas prepared to leave, Alexander placed a hand on his shoulder. This must appear to be her own decision to leave. If anyone asks, Lady Victoria felt overwhelmed by the king's illness and decided to return to her family estate to grieve privately. A carriage breakdown or brief illness during travel will explain any delay in communication from her. Understood, Your Highness. The men I choose will understand the importance of discretion. After the captain left, Alexander slumped into his chair, suddenly, feeling far older than his 28 years. He poured himself a glass of brandy and stared at the flames dancing in the fireplace. Tomorrow, he would need to find a way to gradually reverse the effects of the poison that had been slowly killing his father. He would need to strengthen security protocols to prevent future infiltrations. Most importantly, he would need to begin preparing for the day when he would officially become king. The sound of horses' hooves on cobblestones drifted up from the courtyard below. Alexander moved back to his window and watched as Captain Sterling assembled his carefully chosen team. These were men who had sworn oaths not just to the crown, but to the protection of the royal family. Their loyalty had been tested in various ways over the years, and each had proven himself worthy of the highest trust. Prince Alexander remained at his window as the guards made their way into the palace. In less than an hour, the woman who had been systematically destroying his family would be gone forever. Justice would be served, though it would remain hidden from public view. The kingdom would be safer, his father would have a chance to recover, and the throne would be protected from future threats. As he waited for confirmation that his orders had been carried out, Alexander reflected on the harsh lessons of leadership he was learning. Sometimes protecting those you love required making decisions that others might never understand. Sometimes justice had to be swift and silent rather than public and ceremonial. And sometimes a future king had to act decisively in the shadows to preserve the light of his kingdom's future. Lady Victoria Harrington was applying her nightly skincare routine when the firm knock came at her chamber door. She glanced at the ornate clock on her vanity table. It was nearly 1 o'clock in the morning. Unusual, but not unprecedented. Palace life often involved irregular hours, especially with the king's deteriorating health requiring constant attention from various advisors and medical staff. Enter, she called, expecting to see her lady's maid or perhaps a messenger with news about her husband's condition. Instead, Captain Sterling stepped into her lavishly decorated chamber, followed by 3 additional guards whose faces she recognized but whose names she had never bothered to learn. Victoria's heart rate quickened, though she maintained her composed exterior. Years of political maneuvering and social climbing had taught her to never show weakness or surprise, regardless of the circumstances. She turned in her chair to face the unexpected visitors, one perfectly manicured eyebrow raised in practiced curiosity. Captain Sterling, how unusual to see you at this hour. Is there news about His Majesty's condition? Her voice carried just the right note of concern, the same tone she had perfected over months of playing the devoted wife, while systematically orchestrating the king's decline. Thomas Sterling's expression remained stoic as he stepped forward, the envelope containing evidence of her crimes tucked securely in his jacket. Lady Victoria, you have exactly 10 minutes to change into suitable traveling attire. You are being escorted from the palace immediately and will not be returning. For the first time in years, Victoria felt a genuine chill of fear run down her spine. Her mind raced through possibilities. Had someone discovered her correspondence with foreign agents? Had the gradual poisoning of the king been detected? Or was this simply a power play by Prince Alexander, striking against her before she could complete her plans? I'm afraid I don't understand, she replied, rising gracefully from her vanity chair and moving toward the bell pull that would summon her servants. There must be some mistake. I certainly won't be leaving the palace while my husband lies ill. Prince Alexander would never. Prince Alexander gave the order directly. Captain Sterling interrupted, his hand moving to rest on the hilt of his sword. And I wouldn't advise calling for your servants. They are being questioned separately regarding their knowledge of your activities. Victoria's facade finally cracked slightly. The captain's mention of her activities confirmed her worst fears. Somehow, her carefully constructed web of deception had unraveled. She calculated quickly. Denying everything might buy her a few minutes. But these men clearly had orders they intended to follow regardless of her protests. Her best option was to determine how much they actually knew and whether there was any possibility of negotiating her way out of this situation. "What activities?" she asked, moving slowly toward her wardrobe while keeping her voice steady. "I hope you realize that making accusations against the king's wife without proper evidence could be considered treason." Captain Sterling withdrew the envelope from his jacket and held it up. "The evidence is quite comprehensive, Lady Victoria. Financial records, correspondence with enemy agents, and detailed documentation of your systematic poisoning of His Majesty. Prince Alexander has chosen exile over a public trial, which is far more merciful than you deserve." Victoria's blood turned cold. If they had found her private papers, her hidden correspondence, then there truly was no way to deny her guilt. Her mind immediately shifted to self-preservation mode. She needed to understand the scope of what had been discovered and whether any of her co-conspirators had been compromised. "I see," she said simply, opening her wardrobe and selecting a traveling dress. "May I ask how long you've been investigating me?" "Long enough," Thomas replied. "You have 8 minutes remaining." As Victoria changed clothes behind a decorative screen, her mind worked furiously. Her original plan had been elegant in its simplicity, gradually weakened the king's mind and body while positioning herself as the grieving widow who could serve as regent until Prince Alexander was deemed ready to rule. During that time, she would have consolidated power and established agreements with foreign allies that would ensure her continued influence even after Alexander's coronation. The monthly payments from enemy nations had been funding her network of informants throughout the palace and military. She had been selling troop movements, supply routes, and strategic planning sessions. The information she provided had already resulted in several successful raids on merchant convoys and the compromise of at least 2 diplomatic missions. But her masterpiece had been the slow poisoning of King Edmund. The exotic toxin, obtained through her foreign contacts, mimicked the symptoms of various age-related ailments. The royal physicians had been completely fooled, attributing the king's decline to natural causes exacerbated by the stress of ruling. A few more months, and Edmund would have been completely incapacitated, leaving her in effective control of the kingdom. "Time is up, Lady Victoria," Captain Sterling announced as she emerged from behind the screen wearing a dark blue traveling dress and cloak. "I suppose I should ask what story will be told about my sudden departure," she said, pulling on leather gloves with deliberate slowness. "You felt overwhelmed by the king's illness and decided to return to your family estate for private grieving," Thomas explained. A reasonable response from a devoted wife facing the prospect of widowhood. Victoria almost smiled at the irony. If only they knew how eagerly she had been anticipating that widowhood. "And if I refuse to cooperate with this charade, then the evidence of your treason will be presented publicly, and you will face trial and execution. Your choice is exile or death, Lady Victoria. Choose wisely." She nodded slowly, recognizing that her game had come to an end. There would be no negotiating, no final manipulation to extract herself from this situation. Prince Alexander had outmaneuvered her completely, and she found herself grudgingly impressed by his decisiveness. She had underestimated the young prince, assuming his noble nature would prevent him from taking such ruthless action. "Very well. I assume I'm not permitted to take any personal belongings?" "Correct. You will travel with only what you're wearing." As the guards escorted her through the palace corridors she had walked hundreds of times as the queen-in-waiting, Victoria felt a mixture of anger and regret. She had been so close to achieving her goals. A few more months, and she would have controlled one of the most powerful kingdoms in the region. Instead, she was being marched toward exile and an uncertain future. The palace that had represented triumph and vindication now felt like a tomb of lost opportunities. Portraits of previous kings and queens seemed to watch her with disapproving eyes as she passed. The luxurious tapestries and golden fixtures that had once symbolized her success now mocked her failure. In the main courtyard, a simple but sturdy carriage waited with 4 horses and 2 additional guards who would ensure she reached the border safely and never returned. Captain Sterling helped her into the carriage with the same courtesy he would show any noble woman, despite knowing exactly what crime she had committed. "The journey to the border takes 8 hours, he informed her through the carriage window. "You will be provided with food and water, but will not be permitted to stop except for necessary purposes. At the border, you will be released with enough gold to secure passage to whatever destination you choose, provided it is outside our kingdom's sphere of influence. Victoria settled into the carriage seat, her mind already working on possibilities for her future. She had contacts in distant lands, hidden resources that Prince Alexander likely knew nothing about. This exile might be temporary if she played her cards correctly. Revenge was a dish best served cold, and she was patient enough to wait for the right opportunity. "Tell Prince Alexander," she said as Captain Sterling prepared to close the carriage door, "that he has made a very dangerous enemy tonight. I'll tell him you wish the royal family well in your absence." Thomas replied smoothly before slamming the door shut and signaling the driver to depart. As the carriage rolled through the palace gates and into the darkness beyond, Victoria stared back at the towering spires and illuminated windows of Ravenswood Palace. Somewhere in those rooms, Prince Alexander was probably breathing a sigh of relief, believing he had solved his problems with her removal. King Edmund would recover from the poison, the kingdom would be safe from her intelligence network, and the throne would pass smoothly to its rightful heir. But Victoria Harrington had spent years building connections and accumulating secrets. Even in exile, she possessed knowledge that could still damage the royal family and the kingdom. Prince Alexander had won this battle, but the war between them was far from over. She would return someday, and when she did, she would be better prepared for the kind of ruthless opponent she now knew the young prince to be. The carriage wheels turned steadily through the night, carrying her toward an uncertain future, but also toward new possibilities for revenge. Princess Isabella paced frantically in her brother's study as the first rays of dawn crept through the tall windows. She had been awakened by her lady's maid 2 hours earlier with whispered rumors of guards moving through the palace corridors in the middle of the night, and Lady Victoria's mysterious disappearance. The 19-year-old princess possessed a sharp intellect that often surprised those who underestimated her because of her youth and beauty. "Alexander, you must tell me what happened," she demanded as her brother entered the room looking exhausted but relieved. "The entire palace is buzzing with speculation. Some say Victoria fled in terror after father took a turn for the worse. Others claim she was abducted by foreign agents. I know you're responsible for her disappearance, but I need to understand why." Prince Alexander closed the door behind him and activated the hidden lock mechanism that ensured complete privacy. His sister deserved the truth, especially since Victoria's schemes had threatened Isabella's life as much as his own. The evidence had revealed plans to eliminate potential threats to Victoria's power, which definitely included the popular and intelligent princess who commanded genuine affection from the people. "Victoria was slowly murdering our father while selling military secrets to enemy nations," Alexander said bluntly, too tired for diplomatic phrasing. "I had her exiled rather than executed to avoid the scandal of a public trial." Isabella stopped pacing and stared at her brother with a mixture of shock and vindication. She had never trusted their stepmother, sensing something predatory beneath the woman's charming facade. Victoria's sudden marriage to their grieving father had always seemed opportunistic, but Isabella had never imagined the scope of her treachery. Murdering father? How? Isabella's voice was barely above a whisper. Alexander pulled out copies of the evidence that had condemned Victoria and spread them across his desk. Bank statements showing payments from hostile foreign governments, correspondence detailing troop movements and supply routes, and, most damning of all, detailed notes about the exotic poison being administered to King Edmund. She obtained a rare toxin that mimics the symptoms of age-related decline, Alexander explained. The royal physicians never suspected because it perfectly replicated what they expected to see in a man of father's age under the stress of ruling. A few more months, and he would have been completely incapacitated or dead. Isabella examined the documents with growing horror and anger. The servants who brought father his meals, were they involved? Most appear to be innocent. Victoria was careful to administer the poison through father's personal wine collection, which she had access to as his wife. She would add small amounts to bottles she knew he would consume during private dinners or late-night reading sessions. The princess sat down heavily in one of the leather chairs, processing the magnitude of what her brother had uncovered. What about her servants? Her lady's maid, her personal guards? Captain Sterling questioned them thoroughly. The lady's maid knew nothing about the poisoning but had noticed Victoria's secretive behavior regarding certain correspondence. She had been instructed to burn letters immediately after Victoria read them and to never discuss who visited Victoria's chambers during unofficial hours. The woman is terrified now that she understands how she might have been used. Alexander joined his sister, sitting across from her with the evidence still spread between them. Isabella, there's something else you need to know. Victoria's plans included contingencies for dealing with potential threats to her power. Your name appears on a list of individuals to be eliminated once she had secured complete control. Isabella felt a chill run through her body. While she had suspected Victoria disliked her, the idea that her stepmother had been planning her murder was almost incomprehensible. How would she have done it? The documents suggest a riding accident would have been arranged during one of your morning rides through the forest. Victoria had been cultivating relationships with certain stable hands, and guards who could have made such an accident appear completely natural. The princess stood up abruptly and began pacing again, her mind racing through implications and possibilities. Alexander, if Victoria was working with foreign agents, then her network probably extends beyond just her personal contacts. There could be other palace servants, military officers, or even court nobles who are compromised. This was exactly the conclusion that had kept Alexander awake for most of the remaining night after Victoria's exile. Removing the central figure had been necessary and urgent, but it might not have eliminated the entire threat. Victoria's intelligence network could still be active, waiting for instructions or operating according to previously established plans. I've been thinking about that, Alexander admitted. Captain Sterling is discreetly investigating anyone who had regular contact with Victoria or who might have benefited from information she could provide. We're also reviewing all military operations from the past year to determine what damage her intelligence sharing might have caused. Isabella moved to the window and looked out at the palace gardens where she could see servants beginning their daily routines. How many of those familiar faces might be enemy agents? How many people she had trusted with casual conversation or personal information might have been reporting back to Victoria? What about father? When will you tell him the truth about what Victoria was doing to him? Not yet, Alexander said firmly. The poison needs time to work its way out of his system, and the shock of learning about Victoria's betrayal could set back his recovery. For now, he believes she left because she was overwhelmed by his illness. Once he's stronger, both physically and mentally, I'll explain everything. The siblings sat in contemplative silence for several minutes, both processing the dramatic changes that had occurred overnight. The palace that had been their home and sanctuary now felt potentially dangerous, filled with unknown threats and questionable loyalties. Isabella, I need you to be extremely careful over the next few weeks, Alexander said seriously. Victoria's removal might prompt her remaining allies to take desperate action. Stay close to trusted guards. Don't eat or drink anything that hasn't been prepared under direct supervision, and avoid situations where you might be isolated or vulnerable. Do you think she'll try to return? Isabella asked. Eventually, yes. Victoria is intelligent and resourceful. Exile won't satisfy her desire for revenge, and she has too much invested in her schemes to simply disappear forever. She'll need time to regroup and find new allies, but she'll be back in some form. Isabella turned back to her brother with a determined expression that reminded Alexander of their late mother. Queen Evangeline had possessed the same fierce loyalty to family and kingdom, the same refusal to be intimidated by threats or challenges. Then, we need to be ready for her, Isabella said. If she built one intelligence network, she can build another. If she found one way to infiltrate the palace, she'll find others. We can't just defend against her, we need to actively work to prevent her return. Alexander smiled slightly, proud of his sister's strategic thinking. What do you suggest? First, we identify and eliminate any remaining elements of her network. Then, we establish our own intelligence operations in the regions where she's likely to seek sanctuary. We monitor her activities, track her communications, and build cases against anyone foolish enough to ally with her. When she does try to return, we'll be waiting. The prince nodded approvingly. Isabella had inherited their mother's intelligence and their father's strategic mindset. With Victoria gone, the princess would be invaluable in protecting the kingdom and preparing for future threats. There's one more thing, Isabella continued. We need to consider how Victoria's exile affects the succession. With father's health compromised and no legitimate heir from his marriage to Victoria, the nobles will be watching closely to see how we handle this crisis. Some might view it as an opportunity to advance their own claims or influence. This was another complication Alexander had been dreading. The royal bloodline was clear enough. He was the rightful heir, and Isabella would follow him if anything happened. But ambitious nobles might try to exploit the current instability to position themselves advantageously for the future. I've already scheduled meetings with key noble families for later this week, Alexander said. We'll present a united front and make it clear that the royal family is strong and the succession is secure. Father's recovery will demonstrate that the throne remains stable. As the morning sun climbed higher, brother and sister began planning their strategy for the challenging weeks ahead. Victoria's removal had eliminated an immediate threat, but it had also revealed the depth of the dangers facing their kingdom. They would need to be smarter, stronger, and more united than ever before to protect both their family and their people. The game of royal politics had become far more dangerous overnight, but Alexander and Isabella were determined to master it rather than be destroyed by it. Victoria had taught them valuable lessons about the ruthlessness required to protect power, and they intended to apply those lessons in service of justice rather than personal gain. 3 weeks after Victoria's exile, King Edmund sat in his private study feeling stronger than he had in months. The mysterious illness that had been gradually robbing him of energy and mental clarity was finally beginning to lift. His physician, Dr. Marcus Whitehall, had attributed the improvement to a new treatment regimen, but Edmund suspected there were other factors at work. The king had noticed subtle changes throughout the palace since Victoria's sudden departure. Staff members seemed less nervous, conversations felt more genuine, and there was an overall sense that some oppressive atmosphere had been lifted. While he mourned his wife's absence and worried about her emotional state, he couldn't deny that her departure seemed to coincide with his physical improvement. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called, and was pleased to see Prince Alexander approaching with what appeared to be important documents. "Father, I hope you're feeling well enough for a serious conversation," Alexander said carefully. "There are things you need to know about Victoria's departure and about your illness." King Edmund studied his son's grave expression and gestured for him to sit down. Over the past few weeks, he had noticed that Alexander seemed to be carrying the weight of significant responsibilities, handling royal duties with new confidence while also maintaining an air of protective watchfulness over the family. "I've suspected that Victoria's leaving wasn't as simple as overwhelming grief," Edmund admitted. "And I've been wondering why my health has improved so dramatically since she departed. Tell me what you've discovered." Alexander took a deep breath and began explaining everything: the evidence of treason, the systematic poisoning, the intelligence network, and the plans that had included eliminating threats to Victoria's power. He presented the documents methodically, watching his father's face change from confusion to shock to anger as the scope of Victoria's betrayal became clear. King Edmund examined the evidence with the careful attention of a man who had spent decades evaluating threats to his kingdom. The financial records were damning, the correspondence with foreign agents was treasonous, and the detailed notes about poison administration were absolutely chilling in their clinical precision. "She was murdering me," he said quietly, the words carrying a mixture of disbelief and fury. "The woman I trusted with my life, the woman I believed loved me, was slowly killing me for political gain." "Yes, father. And if I hadn't discovered her plans when I did, she would have succeeded. You would have died, supposedly of natural causes, and she would have positioned herself as regent until my coronation. During that time, she planned to consolidate power and establish permanent agreements with enemy nations." The king set down the documents and walked to his window, staring out at the kingdom he had spent his life protecting. The betrayal was almost incomprehensible, not just the attempted murder, but the systematic selling of military secrets that had undoubtedly cost lives among his soldiers and subjects. "How many people died because of the information she sold?" he asked grimly. "We're still investigating, but preliminary reports suggest at least 24 soldiers in various skirmishes and raids. Several merchant convoys were ambushed with suspicious precision. 3 diplomatic missions failed under circumstances that make much more sense now that we understand they were compromised before they began." Edmund felt a crushing weight of responsibility and grief. Those deaths were ultimately his fault because he had allowed himself to be deceived by Victoria's manipulations. His loneliness after Queen Evangeline's death had made him vulnerable to a predator who had exploited his emotional needs to gain access to state secrets and the opportunity to commit murder. "Isabella," he said suddenly. The documents mentioned eliminating threats to Victoria's power. Isabella was definitely on her target list, Alexander confirmed. An arranged riding accident was being planned. Victoria had already begun cultivating relationships with stable hands and guards who could have made such an accident appear completely natural. The The king's hands clenched into fists as a cold rage swept through him. Threatening his life was one thing, but planning to murder his innocent daughter was unforgivable. Isabella represented everything pure and good about the royal family: her intelligence, her compassion for their subjects, her genuine dedication to the kingdom's welfare. "Why didn't you have Victoria executed?" Edmund asked. "Treason and attempted murder of the royal family certainly warrant death." "I considered it," Alexander admitted. "But a public trial would have revealed the extent of the security breaches and foreign infiltration. Our enemies would have seen us as weak and vulnerable. The scandal might have destabilized the entire kingdom at a time when we need to project strength. Exile allowed us to remove the immediate threat while maintaining the appearance of stability." King Edmund nodded slowly, recognizing the wisdom in his son's decision even while part of him craved more direct justice. Alexander had demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking and decisive leadership that would serve him well as king. However, Alexander continued, Victoria's exile doesn't end the threat she represents. Her intelligence network may still be active, and she has enough resources and connections to eventually mount some form of revenge. We need to be prepared for her eventual return. The king turned back to face his son with a new expression, one of pride mixed with grim determination. "What measures have you taken?" "Captain Sterling is conducting discreet investigations of anyone who had regular contact with Victoria. We've identified 3 palace servants who appear to have been feeding her information, though they claim they didn't understand the significance of what they were reporting. 2 stable hands have been reassigned to positions where they can't access sensitive areas. We're also reviewing all military personnel who might have been compromised." Alexander stood and joined his father at the window. "More importantly, we're establishing our own intelligence operations in regions where Victoria is likely to seek sanctuary. Princess Isabella has been instrumental in developing contacts among merchant networks and diplomatic channels that can monitor her activities." "Isabella is involved in intelligence work?" Edmund asked with surprise. "She insisted on it after learning about the threats against her life." "Father, Isabella has grown into a formidable strategist. Her social connections and natural charisma make her invaluable for gathering information that might be difficult to obtain through traditional military channels." The king felt a complex mixture of pride and concern. He was proud that both of his children had risen to meet these challenges with courage and intelligence, but he worried about the dangers they were exposing themselves to. The innocent days of their childhood seemed very far away. "What about the succession?" Edmund asked. "Victoria's exile and the circumstances surrounding it could create opportunities for ambitious nobles to make claims or challenge the established order. We've already begun addressing that," Alexander replied. "I've met with the major noble families to reaffirm the clear line of succession and to demonstrate that the royal family remains strong and united. Your recovery has been crucial in showing that the throne is stable. Several lords who might have considered pressing various claims have instead reaffirmed their loyalty." King Edmund walked back to his desk and picked up the evidence of Victoria's treachery again. The scope of her betrayal was staggering, but it had also revealed the strength and character of his legitimate children. In their responses to this crisis, both Alexander and Isabella had demonstrated the qualities that would serve the kingdom well in the years to come. "Alexander, your handling of this situation has shown remarkable judgment and leadership. You could have acted rashly out of anger or hesitated out of uncertainty, but instead you chose a course of action that protected both the family and the kingdom. Your mother would be very proud." Prince Alexander felt a warmth spread through his chest at his father's approval. The weight of responsibility he had been carrying for weeks felt slightly lighter, knowing that his decisions had been sound. However, the king continued, "Victoria's betrayal has taught us valuable lessons about the vulnerabilities in our security and the need for constant vigilance. We cannot afford to be deceived again. Going forward, we must be more careful about who we trust and more thorough in our background investigations of anyone who gains access to sensitive information." Edmund sat back down at his desk and began drafting new protocols for palace security and information management. The kingdom had survived Victoria's assault, but only barely. Next time, they would be better prepared. As father and son worked together to strengthen their defenses against future threats, both felt a renewed sense of purpose and partnership. Victoria's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also forged stronger bonds between the surviving members of the royal family and taught them lessons that would make them more effective rulers. The kingdom had endured its trial by treachery and emerged stronger, wiser, and more united than before. 6 months after Victoria's exile, the kingdom of Ravenswood had settled into a new rhythm of cautious prosperity. King Edmund had fully recovered his health and mental acuity. Prince Alexander had grown into his role as heir apparent with impressive confidence, and Princess Isabella had emerged as a formidable intelligence coordinator whose network of informants rivaled those of much larger kingdoms. But on this foggy autumn evening, disturbing news arrived that would test everything they had learned from Victoria's betrayal. Captain Sterling burst into the royal family's private dinner with unprecedented urgency, his usually composed demeanor replaced by obvious concern. "Your Majesty, Your Highnesses, we have a critical situation developing. Our agents in the eastern provinces report that Lady Victoria has been spotted in the company of Prince Roderick of Blackmore." The implications hit the royal family immediately. Prince Roderick was the ambitious younger brother of King Marcus of Blackmore, a neighboring kingdom that had maintained an uneasy peace with Ravenswood for years. Roderick had long harbored resentment over being passed over for succession and was known for his willingness to explore unconventional alliances to advance his position. "How reliable is this information?" King Edmund asked, setting down his wine glass with careful control. "Multiple sources have confirmed sightings," Sterling replied. "More concerning, our financial intelligence contacts report significant gold transfers from Blackmore royal accounts to intermediaries known to work with Victoria's previous network. She appears to be rebuilding her intelligence operation with foreign backing." Princess Isabella leaned forward, her mind immediately analyzing the strategic implications. Roderick has always been frustrated by his brother's conservative approach to territorial expansion. Victoria could offer him detailed intelligence about our military capabilities, defensive positions, and internal political dynamics. In exchange, he provides her with resources for revenge and possibly a path to restoration. Prince Alexander stood and began pacing, a habit he had developed during times of intense strategic thinking. "This is worse than simple revenge. Victoria understands our kingdom intimately, our strengths, our weaknesses, our key personnel. Combined with Blackmore's military resources, she could orchestrate an invasion that exploits every vulnerability we have." The king's expression hardened as he considered the threat. Victoria's intimate knowledge of palace routines, guard rotations, and defensive preparations made her the most dangerous possible intelligence asset for a hostile neighbor. Her personal motivation for revenge combined with professional expertise in espionage created a perfect storm of danger. "What specific intelligence do we have about their activities?" Edmund asked. Captain Sterling consulted his notes. "Victoria has been seen meeting with known mercenary commanders and weapons smugglers. Prince Roderick has been quietly repositioning troops along our border under the guise of training exercises. Most troubling, several of our border scouts have disappeared under suspicious circumstances over the past month." Isabella's network had been tracking unusual patterns in merchant traffic and diplomatic communications between the kingdoms. "I've noticed increased activity among traders who historically moved information rather than goods. Messages are being passed through channels that bypass normal diplomatic protocols. They're clearly planning something significant." Alexander stopped pacing and faced his family with grim determination. "We can't wait for them to make their move. Victoria knows us too well, and she's had months to plan her revenge. We need to act first." "What do you propose?" King Edmund asked, recognizing the decisive leadership his son had developed since the Victoria crisis. "A preemptive strike against their intelligence network," Alexander said. "Not military action, but a coordinated operation to disrupt their planning and eliminate key assets before they can be used against us. We identify Victoria's new agents, neutralize their communication channels, and create enough chaos in their operation to prevent coordinated action." Isabella nodded approvingly. "My contacts suggest several vulnerable points in their network. The mercenary commanders Victoria has been courting are motivated purely by money. Larger payments could convince them to switch sides or simply withdraw from any conflict. The weapons smugglers operate through routes we could interdict or contaminate with false intelligence." King Edmund felt a mixture of pride and sorrow as he watched his children plan defensive operations with such competence. They had been forced to grow up quickly in response to threats that should never have reached the royal family. But their responses demonstrated the strength and intelligence that would serve the kingdom well in the years ahead. "Captain Sterling," the king said, "what is our military readiness if this situation escalates to open conflict?" Our regular forces are well-trained and equipped, Your Majesty, but Blackmore has numerical advantages in both troops and resources. However, our defensive positions are strong, and our soldiers have high morale. If we can prevent surprise attacks through good intelligence, we can hold our territory effectively. Alexander moved to the large map of the region mounted on the dining room wall. The key is preventing Victoria from providing Roderick with the detailed intelligence he needs to exploit our weaknesses. She knows where our defenses are strongest and where they're most vulnerable. She knows which of our allies are reliable and which might be turned. Most dangerously, she knows the personal details about our family and key officials that could be used for blackmail or targeted elimination. Isabella joined her brother at the map, pointing to specific locations. But Victoria's knowledge is 6 months old now. We've made significant changes to security protocols, personnel assignments, and defensive preparations since her exile. Some of her intelligence will be outdated, especially if we accelerate the implementation of new measures. The princess turned back to face her father and Captain Sterling with a proposal that surprised everyone. I think I should infiltrate Victoria's network personally. Absolutely not, Alexander said immediately. It's far too dangerous. Listen to my reasoning, Isabella insisted. Victoria assumes I'm still the sheltered princess she knew months ago. She won't expect me to be operating in intelligence work, which gives me significant advantages. I can approach her agents as a disaffected royal seeking revenge against my own family for some imagined slight. It's exactly the kind of internal division that Victoria would want to exploit. King Edmund considered his daughter's proposal carefully. The plan was audacious and dangerous, but it also had strategic merit. Victoria's arrogance and her outdated perception of Isabella could indeed provide opportunities for deception. The risks are enormous, he said slowly. If Victoria discovers your true purpose, she won't hesitate to have you killed. And if something goes wrong, we lose not only a beloved daughter but also our most effective intelligence coordinator. Father, the risks of doing nothing are even greater, Isabella replied. Victoria's revenge plot could destroy everything we've built. She has to be stopped before she can coordinate effectively with Prince Roderick, and infiltrating her network is our best chance to disrupt her plans from within. Alexander struggled between his protective instincts and his recognition of the plan's potential effectiveness. If we do this, it would need to be planned perfectly. False identity, believable backstory, multiple escape routes, constant monitoring, and backup plans for every contingency. Captain Sterling had been listening to the discussion with growing unease. Your Highnesses, the dangers of this approach cannot be overstated. We're talking about placing Princess Isabella directly into the hands of people who have already tried to kill her once. Which is exactly why they won't expect it, Isabella countered. Victoria's arrogance is her weakness. She believes she's the smartest person in any room, and she underestimates everyone else. That arrogance cost her everything 6 months ago, and we can use it against her again. King Edmund stood and walked to the window overlooking his kingdom. The peaceful scene below, citizens going about their evening routines in safety and prosperity, reminded him of what they were all fighting to protect. Victoria's return as an agent of a hostile power threatened not just the royal family, but every person living under their protection. We'll develop the infiltration plan, he decided, but with extensive safeguards and the understanding that Princess Isabella's safety takes precedence over any intelligence objectives. If the situation becomes too dangerous, she withdraws immediately regardless of what opportunities might be lost. Over the next several hours, the royal family and their most trusted advisors worked through the details of an operation that would either neutralize the threat posed by Victoria's alliance with Prince Roderick or provide them with the intelligence needed to defeat whatever plans their enemies were developing. As dawn approached, they had crafted a strategy that balanced aggressive action with careful protection of their most valuable assets. The lessons learned from Victoria's initial betrayal had taught them to be ruthless when necessary, while maintaining the moral principles that distinguished them from their enemies. The Kingdom of Ravenswood was about to embark on its most dangerous intelligence operation ever, led by a princess who had transformed from a sheltered royal into one of the most effective spies in the region. Victoria had taught them about betrayal and treachery, but she had also inadvertently taught them how to fight back against those very weapons. The final confrontation between the royal family and their former stepmother was about to begin, and this time, they would be the ones controlling the game.